So usually at this point, we would also share with you a little bit about Tempdrop and talk about our product and what we do. But we're short on time, and we also want to just focus today on giving you essential information that you need about your own body, so that you feel empowered by the end of this webinar to go away and make really positive changes. So just to kick us off, we're going to start with a quiz, because maybe like myself and Mel, you weren't taught enough, or perhaps were taught the wrong thing at school, or when we put things into Google, it can get really confusing. So we're not going to pick on anybody, we're not going to ask you to answer, but just mentally in your head, answer true or false to the statements that come up. There is 5 of them, so if you want to share your score with the group afterwards, feel free to do that in the chat box. We'd love to know how many you got right or wrong. So let's make a start. So acute period pain is normal. This one is false. So whilst period pain is very common, and we probably get told it's just totally normal, you just need to take some pills and rest and it'll be fine. This is just, you just have to deal with it, you're a woman. It's actually not normal. Severe period pain and premenstrual symptoms is actually your body's way of telling you there's a hormonal imbalance. And the reality is that it is completely possible to have a period with very little pain and next to no premenstrual symptoms. The key thing is here, it shouldn't disrupt your normal routine. You should not feel unable to work, unable to do your usual workout, or run your daily life. The only exception I would say here is that if you have been diagnosed with, or you do suspect that you have either endometriosis or PCOS or a similar condition, you probably will still have period pain, but it shouldn't be period pain that debilitates you. When we're tracking our hormones and managing our hormone health, the pain can also be managed alongside that. And we have lots of women in our community with these conditions that have managed to control their hormone health and get it under control. I'm repeating myself.
Under control, yeah. And that's an important note, even with endometriosis, that often the pain associated with endometriosis is worsened by the hormone imbalance. So once you can get those hormones more imbalanced, it can just help improve the pain. Yes, there will be pain, but it can help improve it. But you're also in a position where you can better understand when to expect pain to come and be able to manage it better. So yeah, so that it's still connected. There will be a certain amount of hormone imbalance issues that can, make that pain worse.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one. You can get pregnant any day of your cycle, or along with it, you can ovulate more than once in a cycle. So this one is also false. Unlike men, who are fertile every day of the year, all their lives pretty much, women can only get pregnant between 5 and 7 days of your cycle. So this is the days leading up to ovulation plus the day of ovulation. Once ovulation is complete, you cannot get pregnant after that until your next cycle. And we'll talk about in a short while about how we can identify that lead up to ovulation, and then the ovulation event itself, and then how we can use this information to either get pregnant or avoid pregnancy naturally. So this one surprised me when I found out it was only 5 to 7 days that you can actually get pregnant.
Yes.
Okay.
That was a shock to me.
Yeah, it's a surprise. Okay, ovulation happens on the 14th day of your cycle. Again, this one is false. Not everybody is the same. Not every cycle is the same. And you might be wondering why I've put snowflakes on this slide, but it's because I heard a phrase which I absolutely loved just a couple of weeks ago, that menstrual cycles are like snowflakes, which I thought was lovely. But the main point is that snowflakes every one of them is different, and it's the same with our menstrual cycle. When you look at various studies that have been conducted as well, they actually disprove this statement essentially that the majority of women ovulate on day 14 is really not true. And the same is true of a 28-day cycle as well. There was a study which I found really interesting. They did it with over 32,000 women, and less than 13% of them had a 28-day cycle, which is just crazy when we're told that you ovulate on the 14th day and you have a 28-day cycle. So it really puts into context this phrase of normal, yes. Because you could have a 25-day cycle or 35-day cycle, and that's completely okay. Everybody's different. And there's lots of factors that can impact when ovulation happens. So this is good to know as well. Anything you want to add to that one, Mel?
No, absolutely. That's the importance of ovulation tracking, obviously, because you want to be in tune to when that's happening for you in every single cycle.
Absolutely. Okay. Every bleed we have is a true
I love this one.
menstrual bleed. And it's like, yeah, really confusing. Of course, I'm bleeding, so therefore it must be a period. But actually, it's false. A true menstrual period has to follow ovulation. And the reason for that is, when we have our period, we shed our uterine lining that has grown. But that uterine lining has been nourished primarily after ovulation. It's linked to progesterone being present in the body, which produces a normal, healthy lining for us. And then the bleeding follows about 2 weeks after ovulation occurs. And we start our cycle again. So any other bleeding that doesn't follow ovulation isn't classed as a true menstrual period. And actually that bleeding is a good symptom of hormone imbalance. So this is why it's so important for us to track ovulation as well, because then we can identify what's a true period and what is bleeding because of a hormonal imbalance.
Yeah, and that one really blew me away when I learnt this truth, because as somebody who had been on hormonal birth control and experienced, the typical pill bleeds, the withdrawal bleeds, thinking they were true menstrual periods, it was just like, wow. And it's so important because we can't accurately count our cycles without knowing if the bleeding we're experiencing is a true menstrual period or an intermenstrual bleed of some kind, either from synthetic hormones or just from hormone imbalance, where our body is trying to shed a lining, but the lining hasn't grown because we haven't ovulated yet. So that one is just so key, because it can give us misinformation about what's going on in our body if we only track bleeding patterns.
Absolutely. And that links to this one as well, that the period you have on the pill isn't a real period. This one surprised me too. This one is true. We just thought we'd mix it up and throw a true one in there. So as we said before, a true menstrual period follows after ovulation. And the birth control pill, like the majority of hormonal birth control, your body's actually prevented from ovulating. So not only do you not ovulate, the bleeding that you experience isn't actually a period, you're also not producing progesterone, which is really essential for our bodies in so many ways as well. We'll often be told that hormonal birth control regulates your period. Again, this is incorrect. It just switches off ovulation. It just prevents it from happening. So as Mel said, the bleed that you experience in the pill isn't a true bleed. You don't actually have to have that pill break, because the process for building the uterine lining hasn't happened. So you don't need to shed it.
No, that's right. It's like you said, it's not built a lining that's there to shed. It's just simply the cells within your uterus are opening and bleeding. Like that's all that's going on, and that's in response to, when you're on the pill, the withdrawal from the synthetic hormones. It's the way your body reacts. So it's not shedding a healthy, natural uterine lining.
And that's why many women, when they're on their pills, say, oh, well, my periods are much lighter now.
Yes.
And much more comfortable, and it's just because it's not there's nothing to shed, there's no uterine lining to it that's been built up, so it kind of makes it all connect. So I'm interested to know how many of those were new to you and how many you already knew, but it does show us how much misinformation and misunderstanding there can be about the menstrual cycle. But the key thing that we want you to take away is that our body provides data to us every day. That's data about our hormones, about our health. We just need the key to be able to access that information. We need to understand the information that our body is telling us, the key biomarkers, and how we track them. Because when we have this information, it can give us like a wealth of data. And I love how much it can tell you. So excuse the enthusiasm, but it can tell us, there's just a few that are loading on here. But if and when we ovulate, if we started perimenopause, when we can get pregnant, if we have enough progesterone to support a pregnancy, even things like if our headaches are normal or if they are linked to a hormonal imbalance. This is all amazing information. This is all data that we have the access to. We just need to understand how to get to it, using, as I said before, these biomarkers. So what are these biomarkers? We're going to cover just two initially, and then Mel will explain how we track them and how it works. So the first one is basal body temperature. This is our body's lowest resting temperature, which is can be measured as soon as you wake up in the morning, before you move or do anything. At Tempdrop, we refer to it as our sleeping temperature, because we have a sensor that tracks our sleep, and it takes multiple, thousands of data points to give us an accurate reading in the morning. But if you were doing it traditionally, it would be the first temperature you wake up with. So what can this tell us? Sorry, I'm going to try and, there we go, there it is. So it tells you if and when you ovulated. It also tells us when our fertile window closes, so when we can no longer get pregnant in that cycle. And it's also, the temperatures that we see are also really good indicators of what's going on with our hormones, but in particular estrogen and progesterone. So as you can see, it's already building a really good picture for us. The second biomarker is cervical mucus. Some of you might feel a bit squeamish about this, but honestly, it's obviously a very natural bodily function as women, and it can tell us so much information. It lets us know in real time when we're fertile, essentially, when we can get pregnant, and also again, when we can no longer get pregnant as well. This tracking your cervical mucus is really important if you want to get pregnant. This is a great indicator. And again, it's also a good indicator of our hormone levels, because it tells us a lot about our hormone health. So whilst tracking just your period can definitely give you some indication as to what might be going on hormonally, tracking your BBT and your CM gives you this whole new layer of data and information, and it's really primary signs that we need to track. So Mel, I'm going to hand over to you to understand, to talk us through how we track, how we can understand these biomarkers and get the most out of the information.
Cool. So just, going back to menstrual cycle 101 briefly, we're going to kind of put it in a nutshell here. So we're just going to go with the kind of standard length cycle around about 28, 29 days, just because we want to throw it into a nutshell. But as we've already mentioned, for each woman, each cycle can be quite unique. So the menstrual cycle is broken into two primary phases. We have the follicular phase, which runs from the first day of your cycle through to ovulation. Now, menstruation, we've already mentioned, a true menstrual period starts your cycle day count. So the first day of full flow, not spotting, but full flow of menstrual bleeding starts the count for the first day of your cycle. And the follicular phase runs from that day through to ovulation. Now, the luteal phase is the second part of our cycle, and it runs from ovulation through to the end of the cycle. Ovulation is the event in the cycle. It's the main event of the cycle. It's the event that dictates if a cycle is successful, and it also dictates the length of the cycle and the changing of those two phases. So ovulation is key. It's number one in our menstrual cycle, not our periods. So moving through now to our next slide. So what is ovulation tracking? Because, you know, we've just discerned that ovulation is the main event. How can we track it? We can't see it, but we have these biomarkers that can help us know when it happens. So ovulation tracking, or cycle tracking, or charting, or fertility awareness, whatever the term you might want to use, is daily observing and charting your fertility signs to detect ovulation. You're trying to find ovulation in your cycle. So first and foremost, our nightly sleeping temperature, or our basal body temperature, as Gemma mentioned, is a very reliable sign to track, a reliable symptom, as we like to term it, to track. Now, after ovulation, our progesterone starts to be produced at that point. We can't make progesterone any other way but to ovulate. And when we ovulate, progesterone causes our body temperature to rise slightly. So tracking these temperatures every day, you should be able to see this subtle rise in temperatures, a distinct jump as shown on our screen here. Those black dots are our temperatures. After we ovulate, our temperatures should jump and then remain elevated, stay in a higher range until the end of our cycle, or in the case of pregnancy, they remain higher on throughout the pregnancy. So tracking those temperatures every day, you will be able to get an idea of when you actually ovulate. And also shown on our chart, we can see these two primary hormones. We've got estrogen in the red and then progesterone in the blue. Our temperatures are influenced by both of those hormones. So estrogen has a cooling effect on the body and progesterone has a warming effect on the body. So that's another key to learning how to chart for health, is those temperature patterns will follow the general pattern of your hormones, how well they're doing. We've got estrogen should surge and rise to its highest point just before ovulation and then drop away again. And progesterone then is produced after ovulation and should surge up in like a curved pattern before dropping away at the end of the cycle. Now, the other thing that you can pull away from temperature tracking is your luteal phase length. Now, luteal phase should be, ideally, in a healthy cycle, between 10 and 16 days long. When you're tracking your temperatures, you can count your luteal phase once your temperature rises, once it jumps, and those high temperatures are the days of your luteal phase. So by putting the temperatures on the chart and by tracking across the whole cycle, taking a temperature every day across the whole cycle, you can then monitor that luteal phase length. If it consistently falls short of 10 days, now you can get an idea of whether your progesterone production is adequate. Okay, yes, you might be ovulating, but is your progesterone production adequate? And the same goes for the temperature arch after ovulation. You can see those temperatures kind of rise up into an arch and fall again. If that temperature pattern after ovulation kind of hovers quite low, doesn't do a nice arch, that also can be an indication that, yes, you're producing progesterone, but maybe it's not so adequate in that cycle. We're not talking about not adequate enough to sustain a pregnancy, but not great for overall health, because progesterone is a really healthy hormone. It does so much good for our body, and we want that to be at optimal levels all the time. So yeah, so if, you know, our temperatures themselves can just give that insight into when we're ovulating, and then how well that ovulation event went and how well are we producing those hormones. So that's our BBT. What else can we track? Gemma mentioned cervical mucus or cervical fluid. Now, we won't go into too much detail with it, but throughout the cycle, as we approach ovulation, as estrogen increases, cervical mucus should increase in quantity and change in quality, the way that it looks. It should become more abundant, more moist, more water-laden, and hopefully get to this point where it resembles raw egg whites. And those, just watching that every day, observing it daily, and then popping it into a chart can help you see a pattern of, you know, again, how well is your estrogen production working in your body. And it'll let you know when your fertile window opens. As soon as you see that change to a more moist, watery content in your cervical mucus, you know you're approaching ovulation. It's cervical mucus that can keep the sperm alive for that kind of 5-day period before ovulation. So especially if you're trying to conceive, now's the time to take advantage of that. And then it can help you just as a cross check with temperatures to understand better, pinpoint that ovulation window of a couple of days just so much better. Another thing you can track is ovulation predictor kits, or these are urine tests, either strips, or there's little digital monitors that you can use. And these primarily track luteinizing hormone in the cycle, which should surge and rise to trigger ovulation. So that's something else. If you want to add something else to your daily tracking, just to give you more information. And another one is cervical position. This is something that some women decide to track. It's up to you, it's optional, whatever. But over the course of the cycle, the cervix itself, as you near ovulation, it rises up, it becomes higher in your body, and it also softens and opens slightly. So if you become adept at knowing what your cervix feels like, you can actually track that change over the course of the cycle as well. So it's an additional biomarker that kind of, when you pop them all together, you get this nice complete picture of your cycle. But BBT, that temperatures and cervical mucus are the two primary signs. So if you want to start tracking anything, try to start tracking those. So what can they tell you? You know, if you've got irregular cycles, is probably one of the big questions that come up. Is it going to work for me if I don't ovulate regularly, if I don't have regular periods? Yes, it can. Because ovulation, as we learned, is the main event of the cycle, and it can change. It can be earlier or later, depending on what's going on in your body. But when it happens, even if it happens late, you'll still be able to see when it happens in real time by tracking these biomarkers. So this chart here kind of gives us an idea. We see that distinct jump in our temperatures, and we can see a change in our cervical mucus. The very top green bars represent egg white cervical mucus. So for this particular woman in her cycle, yes, she's had a long cycle. It's 44 days long. But when her fertile window opened, when the cervical mucus changed, she knew about it. And then her temperatures jumped to validate that ovulation was successful. And now she could start her luteal phase count, which, by the way, the luteal phase generally stays fixed in the length of days. Within a day or two, for most women, once you start ovulation tracking, you'll be able to see your pattern and go, okay, my luteal phase is consistently 10, 11 days long, or 12, 13 days long. And once you ovulate, you can then count those days off and know when to expect your period. So yes, if you've got irregular cycles, you can still see when ovulation happens. So, you know, we've talked a little bit about this in our quiz about period tracking. Why not just track your periods? Isn't that enough? Well, just to reiterate that a true menstrual period is bleeding that follows after ovulation. It's the shedding of a healthy uterine lining that's been built after ovulation. Now, bleeding, you can bleed at other times. You can have what's known as intermenstrual bleeding. And this doesn't always indicate, or doesn't indicate, the start of a new cycle. So bleeding patterns alone can actually lead to confusion, and especially if you've had some issues with period problems. You know, you might bleed today and you've bled for 6-7 days, and then 2 weeks later you're bleeding again. Well, now you're totally confused. What's going on? Or conversely, you don't bleed for 40 days. Now what's going on? You're just left in utter confusion, have no idea what's going on. So it's ovulation that you want to track because it dictates if a cycle is successful. Now let's have a look at an example of a chart with somebody who was having intermenstrual or irregular bleeds often, but wasn't ovulating regularly, I should say. So here's a real live chart. Now, this lady, she started to track temperatures. A little bit of cervical mucus, didn't worry about that too much because she's trying to conceive, she's trying to understand what's going on with her body. So she did have bleeds. You can see by the little pink bars at the bottom of the chart, she had regular bleeds, but once she added temperatures to her data, she now understood she wasn't ovulating. See how the temperatures don't rise and stay consistently higher for 3-4 days or more. So by just adding temperatures alone, now she understood that within herself she wasn't ovulating regularly. These bleeds are intermenstrual bleeds. They were just random bleeds happening at random times because of hormonal imbalance. But conversely, again, when she did ovulate right there towards the end of the chart, right up there around cycle day 99, it was obvious to her. She finally saw that, hey, I've finally ovulated. And this is really great if you're struggling with irregular cycles and you want to go for hormone testing, because the medical model is that all women have this 28-day cycle. And if they're going to test progesterone, we've learned that progesterone is produced only after ovulation. A health practitioner will say, okay, go in at cycle day 21 and get your progesterone tested. But look at this case here. Way back at cycle day 21, she hadn't ovulated yet. If she went in and had progesterone testing at that point, it would have been non-existent. And there's confusion. Oh, what's going on? But by tracking her cycles, by adding the temperatures, once she confirmed that she had ovulated with her temperatures, she now went in 7 days later, got her progesterone tested, and now she had a true reading of what her progesterone production was like. So when it comes to hormone testing, when it comes to treatment, that kind of thing, if you're wanting to seek help, if you've got this data, if you can go to your healthcare provider and go, I know that I'm not ovulating regularly, but this is what I'm seeing, I'm having intermenstrual bleeding. Now you're in a better position to target some sort of treatment rather than just guessing and not understanding what's going on. So it really empowers you. It really empowers and helps you to advocate for your own health.
Yeah, it puts you in the driver's seat as opposed to being told what you should expect. You have that data to share with your doctor and say, actually, no, this is what's happening and this is when we need to test. So it makes you feel more in control.
Yeah, it does. So even if your cycle's not going well, you're not seeing the typical patterns that you see on the internet everywhere or in Facebook groups, at least you know what's happening. You're gathering data that can give you the information you need to now target some sort of treatment.
Yeah.
What about OPKs? We talked about them a little bit before, these urine testing sticks or monitors. Why aren't they enough to confirm ovulation? Well, on our chart here, we can see that luteinizing hormone actually rises when your body is attempting to ovulate. But that doesn't guarantee that that ovulation event will be successful. That doesn't guarantee that the follicle that's matured to a certain point will rupture and release the egg. So you might get a surge in LH, luteinizing hormone, and that will be picked up on those tests, but it doesn't guarantee that ovulation's happened. Now, in our example chart here, we can see where the LH surge, the luteinizing hormone surge, was detected around cycle day 14, 15, which is typically, oh yeah, this should be ovulation, but the temperatures didn't rise afterwards. And her cervical mucus pattern wasn't fitting that ovulation was successful as well. So in this case now, she knows, look, I haven't successfully ovulated. I've got to wait. I still might be fertile. I've got to wait longer, keep testing. And then with the second surge around cycle day 29, 30, now she has the temperature patterns to confirm that that ovulation attempt was successful. So you can have a positive LH test and not ovulate. And this is why they can be a bit confusing too. And if you have certain conditions such as PCOS, luteinizing hormone levels tend to be higher anyway. And so you can get lots of positives. You can test positive for days in a row, and that's just going to add to your confusion. You're going to be like, what is going on? So by having this extra primary symptom of a minimum of basal body temperature, or sleeping temperatures, and cervical mucus as well, if possible, you can back up if that ovulation attempt was successful or not. So what have we learned? You know, I said this is going to be brief, but what can we learn from gathering data by cycle charting, tracking ovulation? We can learn if and when we're ovulating. We can confirm if the bleeding that we're experiencing is a true menstrual period or intermenstrual bleeding. We can understand if, you know, we're getting multiple LH surges, is our luteinizing hormone quite high, and then we're not actually ovulating. We can learn a little bit about our hormone stability through our temperature patterns, and our luteal phase, when tracked consistently over time, even just the length of that, can give us insights into our progesterone levels. And by tracking our cervical mucus, we can understand if our estrogen production is adequate to be producing peak type or really fertile type mucus, which is what we want to see. Even if we're not trying to conceive, it's a sign of health. So all of those things put together can just help us fill in the picture of how healthy our menstrual cycle truly is. And then this, like we've already mentioned, empowers us. You know, it gives us the data we need to at least get a base idea of what our hormones are doing. We can get a base idea of our overall wellness. We can live in sync with our cycles and our cycle phases. We talked about those two primary phases. Well, we're going to feel very different in both of those phases. There's going to be, you know, times where we have more energy, times when we don't, times when we feel like we want to withdraw away from people, times we don't. And by tracking this daily, we can know when to expect to feel that way. And so we can better plan certain things around our cycles and live in sync with that. And all of this especially can help us to talk to healthcare providers. We can narrow down our fertile window to, especially if we're trying to conceive or even if we're avoiding pregnancy. We can event plan. We can monitor the impact of changes. So if we start a new diet, a new health regime, a new supplement, we can monitor how that is impacting us. Is it making things better? Is it making things worse? We can then plan our exercise, our eating habits, our supplements at the right time, because, you know, some things have an effect specifically on estrogen levels and some things have an effect on progesterone levels. So we can just better time that. We can plan fertility treatments and testing if we're moving towards that in our life. And then because our charts, we can track multiple symptoms beyond our fertility symptoms. So things like headaches, bloating, energy levels, all those kind of things, we can pop them on the chart. It acts like a bit of a mini health diary. So then we can start seeing relationships between how we're feeling and what our hormones are doing, and just understand, is that actually impacting how we're feeling? So yeah, it's like it says, data is master. It just helps put together all this information about what's going on internally and with our overall wellness.
Okay, so we've got a couple more minutes. So I know that you asked us some questions. As I said at the beginning, we don't have time to answer all of them today, but we will follow up with a Q&A document for you. So we just thought we would pick out 3. How much do disturbances such as drinking, assuming that's drinking alcohol, sickness and traveling, really make a difference in charting? So the answer to this really is it depends on how you're charting your BBT. If you are using a traditional thermometer, we would advise that you mark these disturbances on your chart because you might notice some inconsistencies. If, however, you are tracking with Tempdrop, we do have an algorithm which will make these disturbances, like getting up with children, a little alcohol drink at the weekend, or if you're traveling or changing environment, it really doesn't make a difference to your chart. It takes all of those little annoyances away. So that's a simple answer, that if you are doing traditional way, definitely mark it on your chart, because chances are it will make a difference to you.
Yeah, and even with Tempdrop too, we mentioned sickness in there. Obviously, if you've got a fever, your body temperature is going to be higher. There's no way around that. No amount of algorithm filtering is going to change that. Even with Tempdrop, if your body temperature is elevated with a fever for most of the night, then yes, it's going to come out high. We actually do recommend not to wear Tempdrop if you know that you're ill, simply because it's going to be skewed on your chart anyway, and it's going to make, it's just going to confuse and add to everything. If you're feeling really unwell, maybe just put away the charting for a minute and allow yourself to just rest and heal. Yeah. And often, unfortunately, sickness especially can skew our cycles. It can skew our ovulation. It can just make things a bit messy on the chart. At the end of the cycle, you might be able to figure out what happened and still kind of pinpoint ovulation, but don't stress too much about it. And while Tempdrop can filter most things, especially with fever, just put it aside.
Yeah. I'm just going to highlight a comment that was made in the chat as well, that Tempdrop actually gives her a heads up of a fever before she even knows it herself. So
I've had that as well.
Yeah. Same. So it's another benefit to Tempdrop. Yeah. How can you identify health issues through charting? Mel, I know we've covered this briefly throughout the webinar.
Yeah, that. I kind of tried to highlight that a little bit. You saw, for example, that really long cycle chart where clearly the temperature patterns were quite erratic. Ovulation didn't happen for a long time. There was intermenstrual bleeding. You will see those patterns. You got your kind of textbook cycles that look so lovely on a chart, and then other cycles where things just don't look quite right. So as you get to know your patterns, you'll be able to more come to understand when things just aren't quite right, and you see that on your chart in real time as it develops throughout the cycle.
And this one, we had a lot of these questions actually about perimenopause. Just a couple of insights that you can share with us about how we can see this on our charts, or at least start to see the beginnings of it on our chart.
Yeah, so this phase of perimenopause, this part of our life, is basically the reverse of what happened to us in puberty. Like that, when we started our periods, we might have had irregular cycles, periods health wasn't quite 100%. Well, it's kind of the reversing of that. So as you get along in years and you're charting away and you've got hopefully regular cycles, and then suddenly they start to become more irregular, or perhaps the luteal phase starts to get shorter in your cycles first, you might see that. And then, you'll see that ovulation is being delayed. You start, it becomes longer between ovulation events. Those are the insights that you can get by continuing to chart through that now you can start to understand, is this me in perimenopause? Is this my body changing? Or is this just an off cycle where something else is affecting my ovulation? So, we all have that at times. So you might have one cycle that's just a bit off. Well, don't automatically assume on perimenopause. Watch for the pattern over time. And then that can give you insights into what's going on and help you dig deeper into the support that your body will need through the perimenopause phase and on into menopause. So, you're not suddenly I'm late for a period and freaking out that I could be pregnant at 45. You would be able to see, oh no, I haven't ovulated yet. So this cycle's just longer than normal. So yeah, it just would help you feel more confident about what's going on through that time.
And I know lots of questions were linked to like reducing symptoms as well. And whilst we know we're still going to experience some symptoms during that period of time, knowing that we are in perimenopause and understanding our cycle and our hormones, we can treat our hormones in the right way and definitely reduce those symptoms as well, which is really important for many of you. Okay, so just finally, we realised that we've run through a lot of information in a very short period of time. I think some of it you shared, you were familiar with, and some has provided a deeper layer. But if you have any very personal or very specific questions, we are here to answer them. As we said at the start, Tempdrop is also about education and empowering women. So we've provided a number of places you can contact us. You can email us with our email address. You can DM us on our Instagram or on our Facebook page. And we also have an Exploring Tempdrop group for those of you who don't have a Tempdrop and just want to get some more information about fertility awareness and charting. And we also have a Tempdrop group with very experienced charters, educators, clinicians in that group if you've already purchased your Tempdrop. And we obviously also have our website with lots of articles available on there as well. We are more than happy to provide support wherever we can, so please don't feel afraid to reach out to us. And we really appreciate you taking out the time. We love talking about this. We hope you love hearing about this. So have a great day, great evening. Enjoy.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, everyone.